Hi, I'm Debbie Georgatos. Welcome to my show, America, Can We Talk? Today, we're going to talk about the police bailout on the Democrats, Abigail Shrier, author of Irreversible Damage, the Transgender Craze, Seducing Our Daughters, joins me, and the Democrats' Barr-Brawl backfires. And of course, I'll tell you why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth.
And hello again and welcome to America Can We Talk and to today's First Five. I'm Debbie Georgatos. 100 different police agencies announced in the last couple of days that they are pulling out of supporting and working at the Democrat National Convention to be held in Milwaukee in August. This is 100 agencies a little bit bothered by the attitude, not just of the defund the police messaging coming out of the left, but specifically in Milwaukee, there was an order, a citizen oversight commission that directed the Milwaukee police chief to publicly account for their using tear gas during protests in late May and in June. The point is that the city itself is turning on the police and other police agencies thinking we're going to go and work in that city where you have the city itself turning on the police. And so the DNC convention now has had police agencies understanding this under contract with the DNC saying, no thanks, not going to work your convention. And this, I think, is just the beginning of, and what I hope we'll see more of, is practical pushback against the insanity of the idea that we're going to defund the police in this country. The idea of defunding the police, great trend, great slogan if you're a radical leftist, anti-American, Antifa person, not such a great thing for the common American, considering their safety in their lives, wherever they live around the country, considering what is their safety, their life going to be like if not only police are defunded or funding is cut, is reduced to the police departments, and on top of that, the pressure put on police departments by the left in this country, it's pressure for them to be concerned about their own enforcement tactics, going to err on the side of not taking action when maybe action is needed because they don't want to be the next one in the headlines in this country being criticized and attacked over their conduct in any particular interaction. So there's going to be a long-term and rolling pushback against the left in this country until the idea of defunding the police, either they step back from it or they realize they just can't win elections running on such absurd slogans such as defund the police. Last quick thing in today's First Five, there is an ad put out, and a friend of mine sent this to me, and it's a 30-second ad just picturing in Minneapolis what it's like defunding the police. So Matt, this is clip one.
Honey, I think someone's in the house.
911, what's your emergency?
Hi, yes, I think someone is breaking into my house. Please send help.
Unfortunately, ma'am, a human resource officer is currently unavailable. We could send someone tomorrow between the hours of 8:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m.
Defunding the police has real-life consequences. Radical liberals are fighting for a police-free future. Don't let them put your family in danger.
Now, folks, in wrapping up today's First Five, I will say this. I favor, and I think every rational American favors being attentive in cases of police brutality, investigating immediately when cases of police brutality are alleged, constantly working to monitor relationships between police departments and the citizens in the county or a city where they work. It is not as though the choice is leave everything as it is and do nothing or defund the police. America was actually already on, and still is already on, the track of constantly trying to improve policing in our country, constantly trying to improve if there are past behaviors, past practices no longer acceptable. We were already on that path. If you listen to Brandon Tatum on this show a couple weeks ago, the former police officer in Phoenix who was a co-founder of Blexit, he said most of what the left is demanding was already happening in police departments around this country. but we are at a very scary time where the left seems to be just capitulating their messaging, their support for what we're watching in America's streets. Antifa, Black Lives Matter, as led by the Marxists who founded it, engaging in actually dangerous activity, and police not only unsure whether to get involved or how far to get involved or what to do, but actually finding themselves in the crosshairs of the elected officials running the cities around our country. America's not going to be happy with this. So I want to wrap up the first five by saying I think the DNC just got a little bit of a sting, recognizing they've now lost 100 contracts with police agencies trying to help that should have been there at their convention. And they're going to have to figure out moving forward between now and November what they really mean to say about America's police. And that, my very fine friends, is today's First Five. So I mentioned at the start of the show, we have a guest joining us, should be on the phone. I want to show you a picture. I brought her book with me. This is an author named Abigail Shrier. Her book is called Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze, Seducing Our Daughters. This is a picture of the cover, and you can order it on Amazon, as I did. And it is a great, great book, very thoughtfully written and researched and just very thoughtfully written on a very, very tender topic and a very challenging topic in American society today. So I believe we have Abigail on the phone. Hi, Abigail.
Hi.
So glad you could join me. And your book, Irreversible Damage, I will tell you, I've discovered a lot of that you've written on this topic of the transgender craze, seducing our daughters. Going back to, I actually want to, first of all, great book. Congratulations on a great book.
Thank you.
You mentioned you've actually written articles in the past about the idea that there are, I don't know if phases is the right word, but you have challenges parents face when their daughters are going through some difficult phase in their life. And you actually wrote something in January of 2019. You called it When Your Daughter Defies Biology, but basically getting at the idea that parents have kids come home and say, in some degree or phase, I think I have a problem. So, and I guess I want to start with, there's so many things to talk about, but to start with, it seems in the last couple of years in America, all of a sudden an explosion of cases of alleged transgenderism. Girls, biological girls, saying they really think that they're meant to be boys, boys meant to be being girls. And people look at it and say, well, how could this suddenly be happening? So you actually document and talk about the reasons some of this craze is happening. Can you just talk about why are we watching such a radical uptick in the number of cases of alleged transgenderism?
So this is, girls go through these hysterias. This is the same population that would have been engaging in prior eras in anorexia and cutting and bulimia. It's girls who are sharing and increasing their own pain, and they're in real pain. We are seeing a mental health crisis facing our teenage and even tween girls that we've never seen before. Very high rates of anxiety and depression. And these girls in distress look to the culture to explain their pain. And in prior eras, they might have said, "Oh, I'm so fat. If I weren't so fat, I would be happy." And today they're saying, "Oh, I'm not supposed to be a girl. I'm really a boy."
That's a great description to start with, and it is a very troubling thing. And you may be aware, I'm sure, I know you are aware of a case in Dallas where we had a family. They had twin boys. The parents divorced, and the mom was wanting one of the boys, these identical twin boys, to be a girl. It was saying that he was really a girl. The dad was saying, no. So, I mean, I would imagine in stressful situations too, and the child apparently exhibited some behaviors going in both directions. So I imagine even stresses at home contribute to kids' confusion in this area. Is that right?
Well, they certainly can. I mean, the thing to know is, first of all, I'm not talking about the little kids. So I'm talking about teenage girls, adolescent girls with no childhood history of gender dysphoria, no childhood history of discomfort in their biological sex, who hit puberty, and they are in a lot of distress. And incidents that in prior eras wouldn't have been considered traumas are traumatic for this generation. So maybe they don't fit in at school, maybe they lose their friend group, maybe they get dumped by a boy, or maybe they have the death of a pet or even a grandparent. Things that happen in middle and high school, and were more typical of prior generations, are absolute crises for these very sheltered young girls. So it does throw them into a tailspin. And unlike in prior generations who spent more time with their girlfriends in person, this generation spends most of its time online. They don't hang out with their friends without the internet. So when they have questions about who they are and how to deal with their discomfort and why they're not perfectly pretty or feminine or whatever it is, they take those questions to a very bad place, which is the internet and social media.
You actually have a chapter called The Influencers, and it is, among things, describe people online who are not just describing their own challenges and maybe their dysphoria, but actually kind of walking them through it, celebrating it, normalizing it, legitimizing it. And that is actually what you're talking about, I think, is that one piece of it is girls seeing online that other people seem to be finding a path out of their confusion by concluding they are a transgender, concluding they're moving forward. And I think parents aren't always aware what kids are watching online. So how big of a factor is it just what these stories are that are being told online?
It's massive, and the reason I know this is the book's jumping off point is the work of public health researcher, Brown University public health researcher Lisa Littman, who found that these girls were deciding with their friends that they were transgender after social media immersion. And I looked into it, and I can tell you there's a battalion of transgender influencers on social media. You do not have to go looking for them to queue up. A lot of girls come upon them in a very innocuous way. They participate in art sharing websites and things like that, and they end up with these influencers, and they're on every form of social media, and their videos are highly well produced. They're sort of intoxicating, and they're kids just a little bit older than them in their 20s, influencers, transgender influencers, telling them that if they start a course of testosterone, all their troubles will go away.
It is the saddest thing. And then you also speak about, and I'd love to have you talk about today, you write about in your book, the role of counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, because I would say, now this is backing up to when I was a child, which is many years ago, I would imagine in my childhood that if someone had gone through this, most professionals, if you took a child to a psychiatrist, psychologist, they would say, honey, you're just having a hard time, maybe you need to try this, try that. But there's a different role being played by psychologists and psychiatrists today when young people, teenagers and adolescents and young adults present with this. Talk about the role of the psychiatrists and psychologists.
Well, today, the standard is affirmative care. That's been adopted by nearly every major medical professional organization. And what it does is it instructs the physician and even the mental health care person to clinician to affirm, and in other words, agree with the patient's self-diagnosis of being transgender or having gender dysphoria. And so what it does is now we have a situation in which anorexics in a prior generation, if they had gone to their therapist and said, I'm so fat, please call me fatty, I know I'm so fat, even though they were only, say, 80 pounds and 5'5", you would never have a mental health professional agreeing with them. But today, their job is to say, effectively to say, okay, Jimmy, if you tell me you're a boy, then I respect that and honor it. I will call you he and him, and we don't have to tell your parents.
Wow, it is it's interfering with the parents essentially, because if parents are concerned and parents really they've known their child their entire lives and seen their child to have been in the range of normal behavior and growth of a girl or a boy, and suddenly facing this, parents were really kind of looking for help from a professional to say, how do we help him through this or her through this, not how do we validate this and just agree with whatever it is they're saying. It's a very problematic thing in this family episode for families in these episodes to have the experts essentially steering the kid to whatever he or she is saying, and really the parents are pushed out of what they might traditionally have been their role of trying to help their child get through it and back on track to being the gender that they really are. That's truly amazing. Actually, I was going to turn to the role of the schools, but you sound like you wanted to add something there.
No, it's all right. I mean, yeah, I'm happy to. I'll just say that the parents are undermined by virtually everyone in society, and from the therapists that they hire to help with their children or they think are helping their children, to the doctors who so easily hand over testosterone. I mean, you name it. In society, they are pushed so hard on this, and then of course the schools are among the most aggressive actors.
Yeah, I'd love to have you talk about the role of the schools, because I do think that many parents, especially if their kids are grown and they haven't really haven't been involved in public school life in a while, or private school life too, maybe are not aware of all the changes that have happened. So talk about the role of the schools in this craze.
Well, in many schools, certainly in California, it's mandated. Where I live is mandated. It's part of the public school curriculum starting in kindergarten. Students are introduced to gender ideology, so they are told from the kindergarten on that if they're that a doctor made an arbitrary decision when they assigned their gender at birth based on their genitalia, but as they grew up, that they would ultimately decide who they really were. And frankly, and they even tell them, the only person who knows what your gender is you. This drumbeat continues throughout school, and it's in private schools, it's in public schools, throughout school. And then when a child has a crisis, when the family moves and they don't have friends, when whatever, and they feel, when girls hit puberty and they feel imperfectly feminine, this explanation of not really being a girl readily leaps to mind. But there's something else too. It is policy in California, as it is in New York, and I've heard from parents in New Jersey and other places, that if a child decides to pick a new gender or a new name in school, the official policy is to keep that from the parents. So the school will actually create two sets of forms, one with the child's birth name that the parents see, and then a private internal set of forms where they keep, where the child uses their other name. And in many cases, the child will be using the opposite sex bathrooms or even staying with the, opposite sex kids on the overnight, and the parents will have no idea.
I find this staggering. I found your book staggering, but these stories and the idea that parents are left in the dark and they're being treated as though their views, their role as parents is just irrelevant. In fact, I assume the thinking of the schools and those advocating these kind of policies is these parents may be interfering with or detrimental to their child's health by their sharing with the child their views and their thoughts. And it's just like the parents are viewed as someone as interfering with essentially the state and the school raising this child and allowing this child to be developed into whatever gender they have chosen. I find that, and actually, how long has this been going on in California that you're talking about?
It's been going on for a few years now. The California framework, I think, didn't go into effect officially until 2018. But in California, I would say that you're exactly right. You said it beautifully. The teachers will say that the parents are the problem. In fact, I interviewed a lot of public school teachers and educators, and they would tell me that with an LGBTQ child, school is a safe zone, but home may not be. It may not be safe for the children. So we have to protect that identity and protect the children's LGBTQ identity from the parents who may not be safe.
Wow. You had another article, by the way, this article I'm pretty sure we put up on our website, americacanwetalk.org, for today's show links. You had an article from Daily Mail, and I don't see the date on it quickly. Oh, yeah, it was July of this year, where you were talking about the idea that parents are actually, the caption of the article was, too scared to stop their transgender children taking hormone blockers because of pressure from aggressive schools and fear of being shamed on social media. That's a staggering place for us to be in America, where we think we're a country more or less rooted in traditional family units, which I realize have much change. A lot of change has happened in the last several decades. But you're actually talking about parents afraid to interfere with their child being given hormonal blockers, because they will be shamed. Can you talk about who does that shaming and how?
Oh, well, I think that any parent who says, honey, I don't think this is right. This is coming out of nowhere. You never were even a tomboy. I know you have anxiety and depression, but this doesn't seem to be right. A parent holds themselves out for all kinds of opprobrium. First of all, their children can report them at school to the principal, because the children will be asked, is your home supportive? Is it safe? Parents are really worried of losing their authority over these kids because they're really terrified that their kids will self-harm. I mean, it's not self-interest. It's not even just about, I mean, the number of parents who have said to me, I don't care if I get fired from my job. What I'm really worried is that she'll cut me off at some point, and then I won't be able to stop her from, undergoing a voluntary double mastectomy, as they do, or going on a course of testosterone, which causes all kinds of harm.
Wow. Okay. You have a chapter called The Regret, and I had a couple articles ready, but I'd rather have you just talk about it. The idea that being that when young people are going through this, young girls are going through this, and they're being reinforced by the counselors and psychiatrists and psychologists, and reinforced by the school, and they're charging forward because they have gone through some experience and it's caused them to believe they're really transgender, that they actually engage in the beginnings of hormone treatments, as you're talking about young girls actually having double mastectomies. But the point I wanted to get at was there is a growing recognition that there are young people and people in their 20s and 30s coming out more and more to say, I so regret that I did this to my body, to myself, and I don't know, I wish someone had warned me that maybe this wasn't a good idea. Can you talk about your research in that area, the regret part of it?
Sure. So because these girls are not actually suffering with real typical gender dysphoria, unsurprisingly, gender transition doesn't cure them. So they're just as unhappy as they were very often, as they, or even more unhappy once they medically transition. So we're seeing explosive rates of populations of detransitioners. These are young women, they're very brave young women who realized, I think of one young woman, Desmond, who I talked to, who, was celebrated in high school from the moment she decided she was trans. Her therapist privately agreed with her and encouraged her. She started a course of testosterone when she turned 18. Everyone happy to, sign it over. And of course, she ended up with terrible uterine cramping and atrophy, which can happen from these massive doses of testosterone that they put these young women on, 10 to 40 times what their bodies would normally endure. Oh. And she had terrible uterine cramping and had to have a hysterectomy. And it was only when she woke up from a hysterectomy that she realized that her cheerleaders were gone and she'd made a terrible mistake.
It could about make you cry, honestly, make a grown woman cry to think about this and to think that there's so little help for these girls in society. As you're saying, parents are silenced. They don't want to lose connection with their child. They don't want to be shut off. The schools are reinforcing it. So what is our way forward? Abigail, you've written this great book. Again, I want to show our listeners what it looks like, the invisible damage. But what is our way, the irreversible damage. What's our way forward in society to correct this horrific path that we're on?
We got to do a bunch of things. We have to hold doctors accountable. Right now, a girl can walk into a medical clinic or a Planned Parenthood if she reaches the age of medical consent in her state, or in the case of Planned Parenthood, it's usually 18, and walk out that day with a course of testosterone without even a therapist note. In some states, she can do this at 15, like Oregon, okay, without even a therapist note and no parental approval. We have to start holding doctors accountable for handing out controlled substances like this, Schedule III controlled substances, as if they were Tic Tacs. Another thing we need to do is we really do need to oppose gender ideology in the school. There's no reason we can't show compassion for transgender children without indoctrinating an entire student body in gender confusion, which is exactly what we're doing right now. We have to get our daughters off social media. We know it's responsible for massive rates of anxiety and depression. These girls are in mental health crisis. They feel so much less than and so one down. They feel like they can never measure up. And unfortunately, their tormentors are right in their pockets. And we have to remind Gen X parents, and I include myself in this, that they're the parents for a reason. They don't have to honor every announcement that their daughters make about themselves. They are there to set limits, and just because your 11, 12-year-old decides she's pansexual doesn't mean you have to agree with that. You don't have to go along with it, and you certainly shouldn't let her make announcements online that are likely to invite all kinds of internet adults to reach out to her.
I love all those suggestions. I was going to say, for parents who are involved in their school systems at all, I know, and we're in Texas, so I think we're maybe not as far along in this issue, I'm sure we're not, as in California and other places, but parental involvement and having parents aware what's taught at school is a huge part of it. And I think that parents who understand, my kids coming home and being told in, I think you were saying kindergarten, about gender ideology and that the doctor randomly assigned you a gender at your birth. there have to be ways for parents. I know in Texas we have a lot of activism with our Texas Board of Education. We have parents reviewing textbooks, parents reviewing content, and I hope that that feels like another place. There needs to be activism on parents' parts to tell the schools you can't be taking away the role of parents, especially at the kindergarten level. So is that another thing, parents, that you support, parents doing that?
Absolutely. The problem is once the kids hit middle school, there really does become a culture of us and them, and the middle school students are much more reluctant to go home and tell mom and dad all the embarrassing things they learned at school. So the parents really have no idea, even in California, and we have had massive efforts. For instance, there was a massive protest by parents, and they succeeded in getting one book that was a few books that were particularly disturbing taken off the official curricula, taken out of the framework. But then the schools went ahead and supplied them to teachers through their virtual libraries. So there's all kinds of ways of undermining the parents, and unfortunately, the teachers are really being trained by activists. I talk about this in my book, but they're literally being trained by the activists. So very often parents have no idea what's going on in the schools.
Wow. Well, you know, I can hear, I have friends in Texas. We did not homeschool our kids, and they are grown, but I have friends who did. And I can hear my friends, my voice saying in my ear saying, you know what, this is why parents homeschool, because they pull the kids out or put them in a private school where they have more direct impact on what the kids learn. At homeschool, obviously, I guess you control it all, but at other private schools, and I can see that frustration parents have if they can't penetrate, they can't understand what's being taught in their kids' schools, and they can't get the schools to openly tell them. Eventually, you're going to drive kids away, which may be one wedge ultimately that makes the schools realize we have to be more responsive and more, to use a trendy word, inclusive in whose advice we listen to, what we teach children. I actually think that this could begin to be a wedge that will drive parents and kids away from public school if they feel like they can't get on top of or get involved in what their kids are learning.
I can only tell you that I interview mostly overwhelmingly progressive parents, and they send their kids to some of the toniest private schools in Manhattan and elsewhere. And they were, even in the private schools, where I was getting calls, there were 15 and 20% of a 7th grade class was announcing that they were transgender. Some of these young girls had watched as 2 or 3 transgender speakers came to speak to their school, and lo and behold, a lot of the young girls decided, oh, that's me, I'm transgender too.
Oh, it's so troubling. One last quick point. You also had a piece, you wrote it, Amazon enforcing trans orthodoxy. Can you just tell, you were just basically talking about Amazon among many other cultural institutions or businesses. It's just trendier and easier to support the transgender ideology than to honor a book like yours that is trying to bring truth, rationality, and facts and evidence to the fore. So what did Amazon do to your book? Amazon
did something really, really shocking. They actually told my publisher, so if you enter search terms for a book, it will suggest certain books. And unfortunately, my publisher was specifically barred from buying a sponsored ad of any words from my book. So if you enter search words looking for my book, Amazon will go out of its way to suggest other books, specifically ones that promote transition and think it's a great idea for young teenage girls. So at some point, even my name became something you could search and be suggested a different book.
I was going to say, I actually had that experience. I forgot, I read about your book somewhere and quick went to Amazon, tried to find it, and I had to cull through to get down to getting your book. Because
That's right.
I certainly experienced that myself. Well, I commend you. Abigail Shrier, this is a great book. I want to again show our listeners this is what it looks like. And we mentioned before she came on air, the picture on the front it's a great, it's a symbolic and accurate, alarmingly accurate picture, portrayal in the cover, but it's called Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze, Seducing Our Daughters, Abigail Shrier. Abigail, thank you for taking time and joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I tell you, folks, you ought to read this book. And just because I think it helps people understand, I think we see in the media, we see stories here and there, and we may not, until you read a book like this, understand how invasive the craze is to push transgenderism from every aspect imaginable, to push transgenderism as a normal thing, as you just heard this author talking about in kindergarten, kids told in California public school that the gender you are is really, the doctors kind of arbitrarily decided when you were born based on your genitalia. That doesn't really, you decide who you are, only you know who you are. I mean, I think if parents even at that level could begin to be involved in public schools and say, no such thing is happening in our schools, it's going to be a major pushback in our country needed, because this is horrific. The stories about girls who get duped, lured into this because they, as you're hearing Abigail Shrier say, because they're unhappy, because things are happening in their lives, and other generations they might have become anorexic or some other, problematic behavior. But what they're being told now, what they do with their anxiety, say, well, maybe I guess I'm transgender, and then of course they engage in surgery and hormones and things that actually work to physically transition their body. Many of them discovering later, I've ruined my body, I've ruined my life. And so this is talk about something to be active with and something to be forceful about, and something to recognize. Once again, the radical left in this country pushes and normalizes this agenda. This is another reason, and another wake-up call to America to recognize how radically anti-American the leftist agenda is in this country, to try to truly exploit the sadness, confusion, the phases of life kids go through, and say, well, and plant the seeds in their minds in school. Well, yeah, it's probably because you're transgender. Just a horrific thing, but a great book. Encourage you to read it. I'm doing it one more topic today, and actually I could spend days on this topic, but I wanted to. Yesterday during the show, I was mentioning during the show that Attorney General Barr was in Congress, and he was up there testifying at the request of the House Judiciary Committee Chairman, Jerry Nadler. And it was a raucous day, I have more clips than I have time, but I want to just tell you some takeaways. I really urge you to think about how crazy the day got up there yesterday. Now, first, as one overall reaction before I play these clips for you. When you think about the nobility of the idea that our founders tried to create, a country rooted in liberty where you had 3 branches of government, and the idea that you had the legislative branch spelled out in the Constitution, you had the House of Representatives, which is basically people from every state, a certain number of people in each state gets a representative, and so states with bigger population have more representatives. But these people were essentially, the entire structure of Congress was created by our founders with the idea that these people would go up and respect the nobility of America. They would respect the idea of the rule of law. They would engage in certainly robust debate over political ideas and legislation and policy issues. And that was supposed to be something noble and respectable. What you saw, I am not exaggerating to call it a brawl. It was a temper tantrum on the part of the Democrats who control the Judiciary Committee, who control Congress, a childish temper tantrum brawl in which the only adult in the room, or the main adult in the room, was Attorney General Barr. The Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee managed to get a few good shots in, good points in, but I cannot tell you, just an overarching reaction, what a sham, what a disgrace, a true disgrace the Democrats in the House Judiciary Committee hearing were as they supposedly questioned Attorney General Barr. They weren't questioning him at all. The entire purpose of that stunt they called a hearing was to give themselves an opportunity to stare into the camera and ask obnoxious questions and get some great clips they can use in their re-election campaigns. It was a soundbite, snarky, condescending, not letting him answer, not letting him speak. This was the whole point of doing this. It was not to investigate. It was not to understand Attorney General Barr's thinking or reasoning. It was nothing like an adult conversation. It was a childish temper tantrum all day long on the part of the Democrats fortunately for Attorney General Barr, some good Republicans got to say a few words. Having said that, I want to just start with Jerry Nadler. This is clip 2, Matt the Very Wonderful. Clip 2 is the beginning of the hearing. This is Nadler talking about as he's kicking off the hearing. Jerry Nadler of New York, Chairman of the House Judiciary Committee.
We are coming to grips with a civil rights struggle long swept under the rug, if not outright ignored by our government. We are, as a nation, witnessing the federal government turn violently on its own people. In your time at the department, you have aided and abetted the worst failings of the president. Let us recount just some of the decisions that have left us deeply concerned about the Department of Justice. First, under your leadership, the department has endangered Americans and violated their constitutional rights by flooding federal law enforcement into the streets of American cities against the wishes of the state and local leaders of those cities to forcefully and unconstitutionally suppress dissent. Second, at your direction, department officials have downplayed the effects of systemic racism and abandoned the victims of police brutality, refused to hold abusive police departments accountable for their actions, and expressed open hostility to the Black Lives Matter movement. Third, in coordination with the White House, the department has spread disinformation about voter fraud, failed to enforce voting rights laws, and attempted to change the census rules to flaunt the plain text of the Constitution, and even defied court orders on this subject, all in the apparent attempt
I got to interrupt him. I can't even stand it anymore. I am going to get through many more points. I can't even stand listening to Nadler anymore. One thing he has said is true. Everything he says is a lie, except one thing he said is true. It is that the Department of Justice and people on behalf of President Trump have spoken up about the real roots of the Black Lives Matter movement. Yes, they have. They have said it is an anarchist movement. It is a Marxist movement. It's a Destroy America movement. And so, yes, they have done that. They weren't lies. They were true, what Barr had said. But Nadler went through a litany of things, and I just want you to think about what he said to start with. Nadler was talking about you flooded law enforcement into cities to suppress dissent. The Portland riots went on, the destruction of property, this is not peaceful protesters in the street. As one example, the Portland riots went on for something like 53 days before finally the president sent in troops to protect federal property, to protect the courthouse in Portland, because the protesters, the anarchist riot mobsters, the thugs, were attempting to light it on fire. And so this actually happens in Portland, and yet what you have Nadler calling the White House, the president, sending in troops to protect property. You have Nadler calling that the president flooding law enforcement into cities, suppressing legitimate dissent. I mean, what I want to get at, this stuff could make you crazy, but what I want to get at is Nadler knows what happened in Portland. He knows 53 days, not peaceful protests, not sit-ins, not people waving signs and saying we demand XYZ. We're talking about burning buildings, burning cars, shooting people, people getting killed, smashing windows, destroying property, and he's calling that dissent and expressing shock and outrage that somebody finally said, you know what, actually, now that you're destroying federal property, I don't think so anymore. The level of crazy inherent in what Nadler was doing and saying was simply, I mean, if the Democrats think they helped themselves at all in this hearing yesterday, they are truly insane. The only Americans who could possibly walk away from that hearing yesterday in which Attorney General Barr was berated and harassed, the only Americans who walk away with a good impression of the Democrat Party are the radical anarchist, anti-Marxist, anti-American leaders of the movements that are trying to destroy America. Everyone else watching is thinking, what has happened? What has happened to the Democrat Party? But I want to move forward. So, he goes on and on and on, and Nadler goes on and on. I want to just play a short clip. Jim Jordan, who is a Republican congressman from Ohio, one of the true heroes of the U.S. House. Here's Jim Jordan, what he had to say. This is clip 3.
I now recognize the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for his opening statement.
Spying, That one word. That's why they're after you, Mr. Attorney General. 15 months ago, April 10th, 2019, in a Senate hearing, you said this sentence, quote, "I think spying on a political campaign is a big deal." Spying on a political campaign is a big deal. It sure is. And since that day, when you had the courage to state the truth, they attack you. They've been attacking you ever since, every day, every week, for simply stating the truth that the Obama-Biden administration spied on the Trump campaign. 1 year ago, New York Times headline said this, 1 year ago, quote, "FBI sent investigator posing as assistant to meet with Trump aide in 2016. The FBI sent a young lady who used the name Azra Turk to meet Papadopoulos in September of 2016. They sent someone pretending to be someone else to meet a person associated with the Trump campaign. You know what they call that? You know what they call that?
Spying.
Spying. 1 month later, October 2016, they used the dossier to spy on Carter Page. The salacious, unverified dossier, Jim Comey's words, not mine. They took it to the FISA court, didn't tell the courts that the Clintons paid for it, didn't tell the court that the guy who wrote the document, Christopher Steele, had already communicated to the Justice Department that he was, quote, desperate to stop Trump from getting elected. And guess what? There were 15 more lies that they told the court.
Okay, this was one of the best moments, and this is the very beginning, you know, that Nadler has his rambling, ongoing, just verbal assault on the Attorney General. And I mean, I didn't even play the most nasty, mean-spirited things that Nadler said, but then you had, fortunately, Jim Jordan, Congressman from Ohio, pointing out to Barr, and frankly, to America, the only reason Barr is sitting there being harassed by the Democrats is because Barr is going to expose what the Democrats did, what happened inside the FBI and the DOJ, the entire effort to destroy candidate Trump, and then President Trump and Attorney General Barr, along with the U.S. Attorney Durham, are going to expose this, and this is what's making Nadler crazy. But I want to go on and tell you what happened yesterday, too, because it really, really matters in this hearing. So the big takeaways to me were, number one, you watched the left behave as the tyrannical bullies they are. You watch the Democrats on that committee. This is not this refined process where lawmakers are trying to get the truth of things. This was just a stunt hearing designed to give all the Democrats something they could use in their campaign advertisements in the fall. One other one, I hadn't heard of this guy before, but there was another one, Matt, the one, this is clip 5. Okay, there was a guy, I hadn't heard him before, he's a congressman. His name is Joe Neguse, and he is from Colorado, and this is clip 5. This is just a quick exchange he had in his questions with Attorney General Barr.
Good afternoon, Mr. Attorney General. I want to go through a couple of your prior statements. On April 18th of 2019, you stated, quote, that the White House fully cooperated with the special counsel's investigation. You're aware of that? Mm-hmm. Today, yes or no, Mr. Barr, under the penalty of perjury, do you testify that that statement was true at the time you made it?
I thought it to be true at the time I made it.
Why
isn't it true?
June 9th, I'll get to that, Mr. Barr.
I mean, does it have to
Mr. Barr,
do with quibbling
I will get
over?
to that. Reclaiming my time, you answered the question.
Okay.
I have another question for you. On June 19th of 2020.
Actually, I need to answer that question.
Mr. Attorney General, you did answer the question.
No, you said under penalty of perjury. I'm going to answer the damn question. Okay?
You said the answer was yes, is what you said.
Well,
are you saying no?
I think what I was referring to, and I'd have to see the context of it, was the supplying of documents.
No, Mr. Attorney General, the statement was not limited to the supply of documents. You stated at a press conference, Mr. Attorney General, reclaiming my time. Reclaiming my time.
I think that's what I was talking about.
On April 19th of 2019, that the White House fully cooperated with the special counsel's investigation. You knew when you made that statement that the president had not agreed to be interviewed by the special counsel. Now,
okay, I'll tell you, folks, the reason I wanted you to see that is, number one, you can hear that this Congressman Joe Neguse does not want to let the Attorney General answer his question. He doesn't want an answer. He's trying to do the bullying thing, the same tactic that Mueller used throughout Mueller and his entire team during the Mueller investigation into the non-existent Russian hoax and non-existent Russian interference into the Russian hoax. The same tactic, bullying, shutting down someone before they can give an answer to the question. Obviously, Barr is trying to say, I said we had cooperated, and Barr is realizing he's been talking at the time about documents. This guy is trying to, and you can see where he's headed. He's trying to say, well, you said you fully cooperated, but then again, the president refused to testify or permit a deposition to occur. He's trying to warp and twist his words. And fortunately for us, Attorney General Barr is a smart enough guy, is a trained lawyer who's been around the block a few times, is not his first rodeo, to recognize what Neguse is trying to do. Not pursue truth, but to corner him into something he can later call a lie. This is why you saw Barr saying, I'm going to answer the damn question. Thank goodness he did that. One other point I want to make, and so I'll tell you, we'll play one other little clip, and I'll tell you the things I think are important takeaways. But the last clip we have, this relates to something that, at least that appears, no one in the House Judiciary Committee knew, even including Jim Jordan. This is clip 4, and this is another thing that came out of the hearing yesterday.
38 people unmasked Michael Flynn's name 49 times in a 2-month time frame. 7 people at the Treasury Department unmasked Michael Flynn's name. Is this an issue that Mr. Durham is looking into?
I've asked another U.S. attorney to look into the issue of unmasking because of, the high number of unmaskings and some that do not readily appear to have been in the line of normal business.
Wait a minute. So I want to be clear. So there is another investigation on that issue specifically going on at the Justice Department right now?
Yes.
Wow, that's great. So Mr. Durham is looking at how the whole Trump-Russia thing started. You have another U.S. attorney. Can you give us that U.S. attorney's name, or is that something you're comfortable doing? Or?
John Bash of Texas.
John Bash of Texas is looking specifically at the fact.
At unmasking.
38 people, 49 times unmasked Michael Flynn's name, and probably other unmaskings that took place in the final days of the Obama-Biden administration. Is that accurate?
Actually, a much longer period of time.
Even before that?
Yes.
Okay, and we can cut it off there. This is a great thing. And I'll wrap up because I'm going to be out of time here shortly. Attorney General, part of the grown-up, you're grown up in Washington, you're going to accept the job as Attorney General, you may get called to Congress. There was a note at the beginning, Nadler actually pointed out that in all the time that Attorney General Barr was Attorney General previously, which he'd served in that role before, and now he's back again under President Trump, this is the first time he'd ever been called to Congress. He pretty much kept his composure in a long day of blistering ugliness coming out of the Democrats' mouths. But I want to just give you a wrap-up summary of what the great things were that came out of yesterday. Number one, America could see the Democrats are out of their minds trying to characterize the conduct of the rioting anarchists in cities around this country as dissenters who should not have to be subject to control by anyone, including the federal officers being sent in by President Trump. Number two, great thing that came out. One of the questioners was asking Attorney General Barr, will you commit that you won't allow the Durham investigation into the Trump-Russia collusion hoax? Will you commit that you won't release those results of the investigation until after the November elections? To which he said, no, I won't commit to that. I won't commit to that. It's really, really important. You have to understand, the Democrats are trying to say that they're taking the high road, they're trying to have legitimate elections, and they want real elections this fall, and they can't, and they really don't want to have interference in those elections by having Durham release the findings of his report, which, in plain English, what the Democrats are saying, if the American people have any idea how rotten to the core the leadership was of the CIA, FBI, DOJ, complicit Democrats across the board, and frankly some Republicans too, fine whoever it is, fine. What the Democrats are saying is, we can't win this election if the American people understand how truly corrupt we are. That was what they were saying to Barr. We can't win this election if America figures out how corrupt we are. So, Attorney General Barr, will you promise don't tell anybody until after the election how corrupt we are? To which he said, no. We're going to release it when it's ready. And I have to tell you, folks, this theme, there were many, many pundits on the leftist shows going on and on about how outrageous this was. Here you're having the Department of Justice interfere. They're interfering with the elections in the fall. No, what they want, silence in this investigation, that would be interfering in the fall elections. So that was a great outcome of this hearing. We saw how nasty Democrats are. We understand the other thing, the little exchange between Jordan that we just watched a moment ago between Congressman Jordan, Attorney General Barr, realizes there's another investigation ongoing about all this unmasking. This is fabulous news for people who want to get to the whole truth, the full truth about what happened at the FBI and the DOJ. So we got that little tidbit out. No one seemed to be aware of that. It's a U.S. attorney from Texas named Bash. We'll have to see what he has to say. You also had we also had this whole, I want to hit this point, I have to hit it more another day, but Nadler started out his remarks with the notion there's a presumption of systemic racism. And he's saying, therefore, because systemic racism exists, everything else I have to say, everything the Democrats want is legitimate. Everything the protesters do is legitimate. Every bit of violence they commit is legitimate, because after all, there's systemic racism. So number one, in the hearing, Attorney General Barr says, no, I do not believe there is systemic racism in the police departments in America. And this is a point I'm going to hit on again tomorrow on the show, but I want to make this really, really clear today. We have to stop accepting the dishonest premises the left puts out. The entire discussion about Black Lives Matter, anarchy, destruction of property is all premised on this. There's systemic racism in America. Therefore, everything that the protesters, anarchists, Marxists do is justified. Thank God for Attorney General Barr, who said, no, actually, I don't believe in systemic racism. And I want to mention there was a great piece in the Wall Street Journal by a guy named Ward Connerly. I sent his picture to Matt the Wonderful. Here he is. Ward Connerly, a black Democrat, really outspoken, or not Democrat, a black conservative guy who's been around a long, long time. He's a founder and chairman of the American Civil Rights Institute. He is opposed to racial and gender preferences, but he had a column in the Wall Street Journal which is called America Isn't a Racist Country. And he basically is making the point. He said, I know, I can tell you what racism was. When we used to have segregation in public accommodations, that was racism. When we used to have rules that impacted the ability to vote for black Americans, that was racism. He goes through the history of America, coming to today to saying there is no systemic racism. This is a lie. It's a great column because what he's basically saying is the entire narrative of the left, legitimizing everything the left is doing, is a lie. And this was another great thing that came out of the hearing yesterday before the Judiciary Committee with Attorney General Barr. And as I do at the close of every show, I want to turn and tell you why the stories we talked about today matter to you. So we started today in the very first show, the police bailout on the Democrats. And I just love that they did this. 100 police agencies withdrew from providing protection for the DNC convention in Milwaukee, proving that reality and common sense still exist. DC and other Dems are relentlessly condemning police based on the lie that police are facing peaceful protesters. The demonstrable lie that police are facing peaceful protesters. Democrat-controlled city councils, Minneapolis, Seattle, Milwaukee, are relentlessly taking away police authority and tools to contain and stop riots, arson, and property destruction. The reality is that Democrat-controlled cities are facing destructive and dangerous rioting. Common sense is that no man or woman will put on a police uniform and risk their lives to protect politicians that condemn and handcuff them. They will just say no. Democrats are not even trying to appeal to everyday Americans. Every D should be voted out in November 2020. And on Democrats' Barr-Brawl, backfires. House Judiciary hearing with AG Bill Barr was a disgraceful, embarrassing spectacle for the Democrat Party. Extreme rudeness, rehearsed interruptions, asking questions but refusing to allow Attorney General Barr to answer, partisan soundbite tirades in lieu of questions. No decent man or woman of even modest maturity would be anything other than disgusted and ashamed of an American political party behaving in this way. Reality, it's all about John Durham and now John Bash, and Barr's refusal to hold up the results of their work until after the election. The Obama administration engaged in criminal abuse of power. Democrats know the American people will be furious with the Democrats when the full truth is known. And that's why they're out to destroy Attorney General Barr, flailing and failing in their attempt. And that, my very fine friends, is America Can We Talk for today. Thank you so much for tuning in every Monday through Thursday at 3 p.m. Central Time to America Can We Talk, where I always talk truth about America because America matters. And I'll talk to you next time.
Can you
Talk? Truth about America.
Can you